Apparently I'm live. Apparently I'm live. It looks like it is. I have no idea. This is a whole new thing. Oh, it looks like I am. Okay, I'll come out of that then. This is all new to me. It's the first making of all the everything live on YouTube, which feels strangely different. I've no real idea why it feels so different, but hey, let's celebrate all the everything's new home here on YouTube. And hopefully some people find me here over from our usual home or old home on Facebook. So as ever, this is what we call the live making of all the everything. All the everything itself goes out on the podcast, which I will start kind of officially recording in a moment, and you'll see me do that live. So it's all a bit kind of fractals and a bit meta, but in a moment I will begin the show proper. I normally go through a kind of a few mini topics before I get into the main topic. So I normally share what I've been creating and consuming over the last month before I dive deep into the topic chosen by our Facebook group members. This month, because the main topic is so vast, so juicy, and one that is so dear to my heart, I just decided I'm just going to go straight into it in a moment. And yeah, I'm not going to go too much into that at the moment because I'm going to end up saying the same things all over again. But I will just say my intentions for this right up until yesterday were quite different to what I think it's going to turn out to be. And I'll explain why that is in a moment. But I'm pretty excited about this. This is really about as hot off the press as it comes. Some really like fresh stuff has just come through me in the last 12 hours. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to start the show proper. So you'll hear me say hello and all those kind of things, because that's the start of what will go out on the podcast. So you'll notice me do that. That's why. It's not that I've completely lost my marbles and think I haven't just been talking for the previous few minutes. And I'll also need to remember to hit record so that we end up with something to put out on the podcast. Otherwise, it'd be pretty pointless doing this. Let me just double check everything is as needed. My lighting looks okay. Let's hope it is working. It looked like it was. You never know, it might be even more reliable than Facebook has when it's come to doing lives. Excellent. Okay, I am going to make a start. And I promise you will get a lot more interesting. This really is, as I say, the making of. So you get to see me kind of go through the motions of just trying to set everything up and get organized. And I'm nearly there. Right. Okay. Welcome to April's All the Everything. Welcome. And my goodness, what a topic. What a topic. As ever, this was one chosen by our Primal Happiness Facebook group members in a poll. And this happens every month. We always give 3 choices, and then I'll speak about whatever the winning choice is. And I love that way of doing it. It's always very exciting, waiting to see which one will get chosen. And I really love having that sense of kind of submitting to the desires of the group, whatever they're going to be. So that always makes it a lot more fun for me anyway. But this particular topic was one that I was really hoping would win. I normally am fairly, I don't usually have a favourite. I'm usually happy to speak about any of the 3 topics that are in the poll. But this time I was just like, oh, I really hope it ends up being this one that's chosen and my wish was granted. So yeah, I'm really, really happy and honoured too to be speaking about this topic, which is so dear to my heart. I've also decided this month, because this topic is so deep, so vast, in order to do it justice, I decided not to do what I usually do and share what I've been creating, consuming over the last month. I do every now and again, I decide not to do that if it's a topic that I really want to be able to give the full amount of time to. So this really felt like it's one of those in order to be able to do it justice. So let's start by talking about why this is even a question, this idea of the feminine in leadership. It could sound possibly a bit intangible, like why would anyone even be asking that? Well, I guess generally people out there in the mainstream aren't, but it's certainly a conversation I am in a lot with our clients. So most of our clients are going to be, if they're women, are going to be somewhere on this path of devotion to feminine embodiment and expression. It also happens that many of them are also leaders. So they may be thought leaders in their industry, or they may be leaders of people, of a team, often both. And so this is something that comes up in our sessions, in our group programs quite frequently, where women will have already been on that path of leadership, then feel the call to devote themselves in some one way or another, to some extent or other, to the path of the feminine, and then say, oh, hang on, what does that look like then? How do I go into a masculine environment in business, which, you know, is the case for most business, and be a leader and also be devoted to the feminine? What on earth does that look like? How do I do that? And so hence, this is actually a question. It may seem like it's kind of like one I've made up. It's actually a question that one way or another is being asked over and over again in the work we do with women. So that's why it seems a particularly timely and helpful topic. And of course, again, the very fact it was voted for our Facebook group members suggests it isn't something that's just being spoken about within those kind of closed circles, as it were, with our clients. There is definitely this deep call, this ripple happening in the water, where more and more people are feeling this call. So this will be for you. I'll share a bit about my own journey with the feminine first, because I think for all of us, our stories are really what make up our lives. It's all about story. I was recording a podcast with Aidan Wachter yesterday on the whole idea of narrative and personal mythology, tongue twisted today, and really seeing that we are all living out stories. That's what we're all here doing all the time, whether we know it or not. And for most of my life, I was living out a story of the feminine, but completely not realizing I was doing that. And my story, I would say, is a particularly extreme example, which is probably why my path now is also particularly extreme, but it certainly isn't something that's unique to me. In one way or another, everything I'm about to share is showing up for many women too. Again, it may not be to the same extreme as it showed up for me, but it's something that I'm seeing over and over again is happening to one extent or other in other women's lives. This same story is being told. This same story is creating our lives, creating our relationships, creating what we see as possible for us. So I was raised by I guess hippies is probably the better way to say it. And there certainly wasn't this clear sense of kind of, let's say, stereotypical father and mother. There was that to an extent, but probably less so than is typical in our culture. And then I went to live with my dad when I was about 5, when my mum and dad split up. For reasons I'm not going to go deeply into because they are personal to other people, but for various reasons and experiences and also trauma, I had created this unconscious story, and it was conscious to a degree, but the depth of it was certainly unconscious. I'd created this story that the feminine and any representations of the feminine were weak and unlovable, and something I wanted no part of, because in order to in any way embody, express, of course I didn't give it this language, but any way that I might make sense in my 5-year-old, 6-year-old mind of what that would be to embody and express the feminine was something that I saw would be dangerous. It would mean I was weak, and therefore I'd also not only be kind of vulnerable to harm, I would also be unlovable. So of course, why on earth would I want any part of something that was only going to create those things? So I was the archetypal tomboy to an incredible extent, to the point where I was frequently mistaken for a boy. I didn't like anything that would typically be considered for girls. And that means, the toys I played with, I just could not have any dolls or anything that would be like, Barbies or just any kind of dolls at all. All of the things I played with were cars or things in nature. I couldn't even like something that would be considered to be a kind of girly thing to like. And honestly, I really admired boys and what was for boys. And in one way or another, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to be a girl. I didn't really have it clearly lined up like that. It was more, I can be a girl, but in order to be a girl that makes sense to me, I need to be like a boy. It's probably the clearest way to say it. Again, none of this was really consciously articulated at the time. And I remained like that for, looking back, what is actually a surprisingly late age. I had no interest whatsoever in how I looked. No interest in being kind of seen as attractive or feminine, right up until about the age of 14. So past puberty. I'd spent all my time with animals in one way or another. I worked at some stables, or I had this kind of whole menagerie of animals. So I spent most of my time doing things to do that, or just lost in fantasy worlds. And it was, again, a real, almost a lack of awareness that there may be anything in the feminine for me. I think at that point I'd gone so far into this disavowal of the feminine. At that point, I wasn't even necessarily being consciously compelled away from it. It just was the way that I was, the way that I saw the world, and what made sense to me. I wasn't even at that point thinking being girly is bad. It was just, this is me doing what I do. It then, and I suppose this was like kind of puberty finally having its effect, where I realized, like, oh right, there is such a thing as boys, and boys like girls to look like this, therefore that might be a good idea. So at a very superficial level, I kind of learned the mask of the feminine. So it really wasn't, and I'll explain more of what I mean by the kind of the deeper aspect of the feminine. But I learned to kind of almost like mimic the feminine in how I looked, how I dressed, how I did my makeup, how I did my hair. So it was enough to get me what I wanted, which at that point was the attention of boys. Um, and so because that worked, and because I suppose I just didn't see that anything deeper was available in our culture, we see very, very little of the deeper feminine being embodied and expressed in a healthy way. I had no idea there was anything else on offer. I didn't know there was anything I was missing. As far as I was concerned, I was doing the kind of required bits of the feminine right. And that was that. There was nothing else that would be worth looking at doing. It was just completely out of my awareness that anything else might be useful for me. And it's only now looking back, I can see what that cost me in terms of depth of intimacy in relationships, believing that in order to get by in a business setting, I needed to be very very logical, very linear, very push. And so really any aspect of my life you look at, you can see that, or I can see now looking back, that I was, again, wearing this sort of face of the feminine, but then doing everything from this kind of archetypal masculine energy, even though I had no awareness that's what I was doing. It took really going back 8 years ago when I had a radical life change, which I've spoken about before. When my father died, I left the corporate world, landed in, whatever the form of work that I was doing then on this path. It's changed a lot over the years. And it was really, although again, I wouldn't have languaged it that way then, I was starting to walk the path of my soul. It was a few years into that I started to feel this call of the feminine. And my goodness, that was not exactly welcome. And it certainly isn't something I would have predicted. You can hear from the story I've told you, I was the least likely person to consider that something I would choose. I still had, and again, to varying degrees, some conscious, some unconscious, I still really had the same belief about the feminine as I had had in childhood. It still seemed to me that it was very much weak, repulsive even, dangerous and unlovable. All those same things, and again, varying levels of consciousness were still in play. So for me to then start to feel, and this is hard to even name clearly, it was a much deeper thing below logic or anything I could really make sense of, but there was this undeniable call to devote myself to the feminine. I can feel, sorry. I'll share now, actually. I had an experience just yesterday, which I think is pouring into what's showing up for me now, which was, obviously the feminine is something I think about, talk about, work with all the time. And so I think it's funny enough, when we spend a lot of time with something like that, we start to I guess, that kind of familiarity breeds contempt. It's not that I had contempt for the feminine, but I think I'd really lost track of what it meant to me. And yesterday afternoon, I meditated and I decided to meditate on the feminine. And I wasn't expecting it to be particularly powerful, again, because it's an energy that I spend so much time in deep communion with. And what happened blew me away. Within minutes, I could feel such a profound sense of the feminine moving through me that I realized up until then, I had just, in comparison, such a shallow level of understanding compared to what I was experiencing in that moment. As I felt her move through me, I could feel my body coming alive. I was crying, I was rocking, and also just feeling the deep consciousness in that energy. That this isn't a kind of inanimate energy, or an energy that has no awareness. There's something in this energetic that I just hadn't recognized as deeply before. And I really felt, oh my goodness, I am so honored and so blessed to have her moving through me. It was the closest I've ever been able to experience her as goddess, her as a being, her as a deity. And I really wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to have what I've always had, which is this like deep, well, I say always, since I've woken up to this path of devotion to the feminine, I've been able to experience this energy as an energy. I can feel the tone of it. I can feel the texture of it. I can feel the movement of it. But I'd never experienced her to this depth. So I came out of that meditation and was like, oh, okay. I almost feel like I'm starting all over again. And the kind of magical timing, almost irony, that this is the thing that I'm going to be speaking about tomorrow. So I'm just going to take a mouthful and just pause and gather my thoughts, because I hadn't really planned to suddenly go there. And yeah, I just want to see what's going to be most serving to share next. I did an episode on devotion. It might have been last month, if not, it was the month before. And this is what devotion, the path of devotion, has just shown me over and over. As we walk it, what we're devoted to in turn serves us. And so it can seem as though the thing we're devoting ourselves to is static, as in we know the thing, we know whether that's God, whether we know it's the feminine, whether it's soul, whether it's love, whatever the thing we're devoting ourselves to, it can seem as though that remains the same, and then we are changed in devotion to it. What I've increasingly seen is it's not necessarily that thing itself changes, but as we move in devotion, we are able to see and experience greater and greater degrees of that. And so everything is changing as a result of walking this path of devotion. It can't stay the same. We are being changed by walking it, and our understanding experience of the thing is constantly changing too. And again, sometimes that happens just gradually over time, and then sometimes we get this moment like I had yesterday where we're suddenly plunged deeper. And so it makes it inconvenient in a way, because we have these grand plans, as I do, to teach or talk on a particular topic, and we think we know it really well. And then suddenly we're plunged into a place where, like, okay, this doesn't feel quite so familiar. So it's really rich and juicy and gorgeous, and makes life, so much more interesting and meaningful. And yet, when I come now to talk about what the feminine is to me, I'm doing it from this kind of very fresh experience that would have been different had I recorded this yesterday morning. So I am now going to talk about what I mean when I say the feminine. And going back maybe a couple of weeks ago, I had a very, how can I say it, a spontaneous ceremony with my womb, which I'm not going to go into details about now, maybe another time. But in short, it showed me so much about life that I can now see is really what I was experiencing even more deeply yesterday about the feminine. So you'll notice many of the words I use when I describe the feminine are actually words you could use to describe the womb. And that's not because that's my languaging. These words are words that have been used throughout time when people are describing the feminine or other words that people might use to talk about the feminine. The feminine is just a word, a label. Of course, there's many others. So when I talk about the feminine, what this means to me, what this feels like to me is openness, receptivity, magnetism, nurturing, a drawing into, a darkness, cyclical, very love focused, releasing, flowing, and mysterious. And of course, these are just words that I'm doing my best to describe an experience. You'll have your own experience, and you may notice that the words that you use are different or the same. And again, it really isn't about the word. These aren't the correct words for the feminine. These are words that in this moment occur to me as I'm describing something that is a force that is moving through me. It doesn't make sense to me to talk about the feminine without also talking masculine. Can't exist without each other. They'd be meaningless without each other. And whilst the topic of this show right now is about the feminine, everything I'm saying is with an understanding that my honoring, my devotion of the feminine applies equally to the masculine. It just can't be another way. And so when I'm talking about the masculine, and again, these are archetypal energies. These are divine energies. These aren't about men and women, which we'll possibly touch on a bit more. But really, again, these are energies that we can feel when we allow ourselves to open to feel them. So when I'm talking about the masculine, that energy is penetrative, direct, purpose focused, leading, still, pushing, providing. You can hear how different those two words are, the two descriptions of those two energies are, and also how complementary they are, how well they fit together. And so whilst we might look at the world, and particularly the business world, and say we really need more feminine, in truth, we need more of both of those energies expressed in a mature way, expressed in healthy adults. We are lacking both. When we have more people embodying and expressing these beautiful, divine, powerful energies in a way that's true adulthood, true sovereignty, that becomes medicine the world needs. We don't just need more feminine, we need more masculine too, again, expressed through true adults. Okay, I'm going to take a breather and then move into this whole idea of, so we understand now what I'm talking about when I'm describing the feminine. What does this have to do with leadership? What could that look like? Why might we want it? So, as I said, typically, when we look at the business world, it's inherently masculine. and not always a healthy expression of the masculine either. Just to say, it's very easy to, again, look at our culture, look at our systems, look at the business world, and say it's wrong because it's masculine, when a lot of the expressions are actually immature masculine anyway. There's not necessarily huge amounts of this modeling and expression of healthy, mature masculine. So everything I'm saying, again, with that understanding. Yes, there is likely more feminine missing from many of those settings, but I'm not saying any of this from a place of we don't also need the masculine. So I'm going to stop saying that, because I'm kind of veering into caveating now. But again, it's so important for me that we honor both. So in many business settings, there is a real baked into the system. In fact, what the systems are created from is logic and linearity and a focus on what is being produced. And which, again, when I talked about how I experience masculine energy, you can see how related that is. There's very little of the words that I use when I describe the feminine in a business setting. We see very little in the way of kind of mysteriousness and receptivity and fullness and darkness. It just isn't something we see very much of in a business setting. So as with all of life, we benefit when we have both of these reciprocal energies in play, working in a way that serves each other and therefore serves the whole. So just by the fact we're seeing this is missing in the business world suggests it's something we could benefit from having more of. The thing to recognize, and this goes back to the question I get asked over and over again by our clients. So if the feminine isn't inherently a leading energy, how can that work as a woman in business, as a leader, embodying the feminine? How could that make sense? And I thought I would do a little demonstration. There's sometimes a picture can speak louder than words. This is how. This is how. And anyone that's worked with us before will know how much of our work is influenced, inspired by archetypes. And the archetype we are constantly referring to is that of the sovereign. And if we're talking about women following this path, that would be the queen. I can, it's not a leap to understand that a queen is a leader. She is fulfilling a leading role, and yet it's possible for her to do that by embodying the feminine. So first, tightly come out of the ideas of kind of like, what could that look like in a business setting, blah, 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 blah. Again, us being able to look wider, look at mythology, look at these archetypal patterns of energy. Just as the masculine and feminine are archetypal patterns of energy, so are things like the queen, things like the empress, goddess even. So we have these examples throughout time, across the world, of how these things are possible. They exist. They may not exist in our day-to-day lives where we can look out and say, oh, of course, I used to have this woman boss who was able to embody the feminine. Most of us won't be able to say that. And yet, deep in our psyche, we have seen examples. We're just not recognizing that they can still apply to us and in this modern world. So I would like to introduce you to an example of this, and it's someone I think you'll be familiar with if you've ever been a fan of Lord of the Rings, and it's Galadriel. Such a perfect example of this archetype being expressed in a healthy way. So thinking of Galadriel, and interestingly, she was incredibly powerful in the films. In the books, she was even more powerful. This is something that's so important to recognize. We're not talking about, and again, this is why the importance of twinning the feminine with the sovereign archetype is so important when we're talking about leadership. There is real power held in this sovereign archetype. She was incredibly powerful in the books, one of the most powerful characters in the entire series. So she was powerful, she was wise, beautiful, magical, gracious, caring. There's so many examples where she's caring for others and actually serving the masculine in doing so. She's open, noble, gracious. I may have said that already. And she's an oracle. She's an oracle. And that's an important thing I'm going to come back to in a moment. She can literally see the future. There was a scene where she was really tested. Frodo offered to place the ring in her keeping, the ring. And knowing the effect it would have on her, she refused it. I'm going to read this these lines that she said, and I really want you to feel into her power, but again, her nobility and her graciousness and her heart. And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord, you will set up a queen. And I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night. Fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain. Dreadful as the storm and the lightning. Stronger the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I passed the test, she said. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. So I really hope you could feel in that this incredible, powerful, energetic of the feminine as a queen, as sovereign. That's how we lead. That's how the power of the feminine can show up in leadership. Another example that came to mind as I was pondering this is Maya Angelou. And I think this is a particularly wonderful example, partly because obviously she's a real life woman, but also because she isn't necessarily someone you think of as a leader, and yet she was. As I was searching for the poem that I'm going to read, she was described in this little line on some random website as she used her poetry to inspire and empower. We want a description of what a leader, a good leader, can do. Inspiring and empowering sounds like a leader to me. So wonderful example again of how the power of the feminine can show up in leadership. I'm going to read her poem, Phenomenal Woman. It's one of my favorite poems, but again, I just really invite you to feel into this energy of the feminine that I'm talking about and how she was able to embody and express this in leadership that absolutely did inspire and empower. Phenomenal Woman. Pretty women wonder where my secret lies. I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model's size. But when I start to tell them, they think I'm telling lies. I say, it's in the reach of my arms, the span of my hips, the stride of my step, the curl of my lips. I'm a woman, phenomenally, phenomenal woman. That's me. I walk into a room just as cool as you please, and to a man, the fellows stand or fall down to their knees. Then they swarm around me, a hive of honeybees. I say, it's in the fire in my eyes and the flash of my teeth, the swing in my waist, the joy in my feet. I'm a woman, phenomenally, phenomenal woman. That's me. Men themselves have wondered what they see in me. They try so much, but they can't touch my inner mystery. When I try to show them, they say they still can't see. I say, it's in the arch of my back, the sun of my smile, the ride of my breasts, the grace of my style. I'm a woman, phenomenally, phenomenal woman. That's me. Now you understand just why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump about or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, it ought to make you proud. I say, it's in the click of my heels, the bend of my hair, the palm of my hand, the need for my care. Because I'm a woman, phenomenally, phenomenal woman. That's me. So again, I really hope this isn't about the words. Even her amazing, beautiful words is in the energy. It's the energetic of the feminine showing up right there in her leadership. Okay, how am I doing for time? So how can this look in modern setting, business world, for example, where most of us are thinking when we're thinking about leadership, what could that look like? And it can look like all sorts of things. I often say there isn't a right way to be a woman. If we're talking about, women and feminine right now, there isn't a right way. The way I do it isn't correct. It isn't that I'm saying women come get doing the feminine right and be more like me. We'll all have our own unique expression of this, which is down to so many different things. The important thing is to feel what that is for you, to allow that to be expressed through you as you. For me, that looks like allowing myself to be the oracle. I talked earlier about Galadriel being this incredible oracle. In truth, that is an aspect of the feminine that as a woman, I can bring to my relationships, whether that be in my business relationship with Jonathan, whether it be in my work with clients, whether that be with my husband, is allowing myself to allow the mystery, allow the foresight, allow the intuition to pour through me into the world and allow that to activate something to be created. It can be leading from my heart, which is something that honestly I didn't even think was a thing going back not so many years. When I worked in the corporate world, I really thought good leadership did involve, I guess, making sure people felt happy, but it was very much done from my head. I led all the way from my head. I thought it was about, better systems, more logical thinking. If I did things that looked like good things to do for teams, and because I read a study that was how to run a team. And so it looked like on the outside I may be doing things that seemed in line with the feminine, but they were absolutely coming from my mind. The journey for me in leadership, because I absolutely am in a leadership position, is moving those inches down from my head to my heart. I make that sound easy. This path, I don't have time to really get into what that's required of me, but it's not been an easy path at all. There's been huge resistance, huge challenges along the way. But now I'm at a place where most of the time, at least, I'm able to lead from my heart, live from my heart too, but specifically as we were talking about leadership, lead from my heart. That shows up in so many different ways. It's actually hard to distinguish and name specific examples because it really is how I just do everything now, whether that be sitting one-to-one with a client, whether that be creating a program, whether that be making decisions about people on our team. One example that spoke quite clearly to me that I shared a week or so ago in the Primal Happiness Facebook group was I was watching back a webinar that Jonathan and I did for Wake Wild Medicine back last year. And there was a moment where I suddenly had this deep sense of, oh my goodness, if I had turned up to a webinar like this, where people were naming these qualities that I've struggled with for years, the parts that make me too weird, too deep, too oddly shaped to fit into this mainstream world. If I turned up to a webinar and people had been naming those qualities as something that could actually be a gift, medicine to the world, oh my goodness, it would have meant so much to me. And as I spoke that out, I was just overcome with emotion. And I didn't try to hold that back. I didn't try to kind of like pull myself together and be more businesslike. I just allowed that to flow. I cried. I was lost for words for a few moments and just spoke direct from the heart about what that would have meant for me. You saw right at the start of this, I hadn't planned that obviously, but I got very emotional earlier. This is ways, and these aren't strategies, these aren't kind of like how to do the feminine leadership well, but often it will look like these just vulnerable, honest expressions of what's in our hearts. So there is, again, the more we're trying to make this logical, like how could we take these energies and move them into a business setting, we're unlikely to be able to do this. This very much is something that we can feel and experience, not always be able to name in these kind of nice, like set out ways. And it really isn't for everyone. If you're listening to this and you're feeling triggered, or you're feeling like, oh, this really is for me, it could be for you. And I say both. If you're listening and feeling really triggered, it could well be for you. As much as right now, it probably feels like you want to devote yourself to anything but this. And of course, if you are feeling that deep calling, it's for you. If you're feeling none of these things, if you're kind of listening to this and thinking, well, that's, I can hear in theory that could be useful, or I'm happy for other people to devote themselves to it, it probably isn't for you. And that's okay. I really don't necessarily think this is for everyone. If it is for you, if you are feeling that deep resonance, or again, the real trigger, there's a point where you'll need to decide if this is a path you want to devote yourself to. As I alluded to, it will require much of you. So it's not something to just decide you're going to kind of like, oh, I'll just do a bit of that. Of course, you can dip your toe in the water and get a sense of whether this path is for you. But really, there is a point where that deep commitment, that vow to devote yourself will be required for you to actually allow this to be in your life, to serve you as you serve it. And again, there is this kind of like, if you're trying to make sense of this from a kind of logical, heady way, it's unlikely to give you the answer. This really needs to come from this call of me allowing the feminine to be embodied through me is actually me allowing myself to be more fully me. Because that's really what we're talking about here. Going back to my story of childhood, it seemed to me that that was me being fully expressed. It really wasn't. Me trying to do everything I could to run kicking and screaming from the feminine was a compulsion. It was created from fear. It wasn't really the wholeness of me. It was me doing my best to cope with this story that was telling me I can't be feminine. I can't allow the feminine to be embodied through me because it will be dangerous. As I've done the work to integrate that shadow and to expand into the fullness of me, that for me is embodying the feminine. This isn't something I've gone out and looked for and thought that would be nice to kind of layer on top of me. This is something that is me allowing myself to be in my fullness, to be whole. So again, you'll know if that's true for you. It's not true for all of us. There's no right or wrong here. You'll know if that feels like it's for you. And as I just alluded to, in order to do that, there really does need to be this almost like a sort of twin commitment to walk your soul path. This call to the feminine is really also a call to your soul, which requires that we are ready to illuminate what's in shadow and welcome it back into our system. And it requires us to be committed to expansion into our fullness. So this again is why we talk all the time about there is the thing that you are being called to, whatever that might be. In this instance, I'm talking about the feminine. In Wake of Wild Medicine, it's about people becoming their own medicine. And yet there also needs to be this devotion to sovereignty, to being able to walk this earth as your soul, as the gift you came here to be. Okay, so nearly out of time. Let me just take a breather again before I let you know what's coming up in terms of ways you could walk this path if, again, you are feeling called. So, very excitingly, we have Waking the Wild Feminine coming back in September this year. And it's as much of a surprise to me as it is to everyone. I had no idea if I would be running another one or when I'd be running another one. That's the feminine right there. She chooses what I do, not me. And it hadn't really felt I hadn't felt a calling to run another Wake and Wild Feminine since the last one. And so it was always a question like, would I? Maybe I would, I don't know. And had just kind of left it there, just waiting to see what would happen. And then about a month ago, I think it was, I had this very clear sense, oh, okay, I'm meant to be doing another Wake and Wild Feminine this year. And it literally in the last week it's become clear that it will be in September. I'm still waiting to get a sense of exactly what that's going to look like and how long it's going to be, but it's going to happen, and it will be the deepest, most powerful one yet. That I do know. That's the one thing I know for sure. So if you're feeling the call to this path, or even just curious and want to find out more, go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWF. Register your interest if it does feel like it's something that could be for you, because there are a limited number of spaces and also always more interest than there are spaces. There's already a long wait list. It always sells out, and I can't really see why this would be the exception. So if you're feeling this could be for you, do register your interest. And as soon as we do open for enrollment, we'll let you know. So if it is for you, you can make sure you claim your space. And there's also a link there if you want to email us and ask us any questions. Again, some of the finer details don't quite know yet. Hopefully we'll in the next week or so, and then we'll make sure that's added to the website. Okay, so I think that's everything I wanted to say on the topic for now of the power of feminine leadership. As you can hear, it's a vast topic, and some of these areas I've really just touched on. How again this links to sovereignty, how this links to the path of devotion, how this links to the body, which is a huge aspect of this path of feminine reclamation, I haven't even been able to touch on. So all of those things are what we will deepen into in Wake the Wild Feminine. So if again you would like to know more, that's the way to find out more. What else should I tell you about? If you're not already a member of our gorgeous free Facebook group, and it really is a special place, I love it. That's at facebook.com/group/primal happiness. If you want to find out about other programs we're offering, we don't have anything quite yet coming available. So we've got Wake the Wild Feminine, I've mentioned in September. We may have a Wake the Wild Masculine too, which I won't go into detail yet because I don't know for sure, but Jonathan may be running another Wake the Wild Masculine in September. We'll have another Wake the Wild Medicine beginning in January 2022. And Wake the Wild Sovereign, which is our kind of most intimate one-to-one program, is currently full up until early 2022. But if that is something that you're feeling the call to, let us know, because it's something, again, that, as you can tell, sells out very quickly. So if it's something you're interested in, it's worth speaking to us so we can see if that is something that's in alignment for you. If you are watching this live or even on the replay on Facebook or YouTube, and you're not already a listener of our podcast, my goodness, treasure trove time. That's at primalhappiness.co/podcast. An incredible wealth of episodes. It's been going 7 years, I think, and we're in the 300s in terms of how many episodes we've done. So yeah, go discover something that's for you there. There will be definitely something. Thank you so much for joining me. Really, again, feel so honored to be able to share my heart on this topic. So thank you so much for joining me. Lots of love. Have a wonderful weekend. Mwah.